for him. It should work, he thought. Better than the logs, and less dangerous. Grab a handful of sand. Some trickled back between your fingers, but most stayed in your grasp. That was the principle of the pyramid of stones. When and if the time machine should work, most of the rocks would go along. Those that didn't go would simply trickle out and do no harm. There'd be no stress or strain to upset the working of the force field. And if the time unit didn't work? Or if it did? This was the end of the dream, thought Hudson, no matter how you looked at it. For even if they did get back to the 20th century, there would be no money, and with the film lost and no other taken to replace it, they'd have no proof they had traveled back beyond the dawn of history, back almost to the dawn of man. Although how far you traveled would have no significance. An hour or 1,000,000 years would be all the same. If you could span the hour, you could span the 1,000,000 years. And if you could go back the 1,000,000 years, it was within your power to go back to the first tick of eternity, the first stir of time across the face of emptiness and nothingness. Back to that initial instant when nothing as yet had happened, or been planned, or thought. When all the vastness of the universe was a new slate waiting the first chalk stroke of destiny. Another helicopter would cost $30,000, and they didn't even have the money to buy the tractor they needed to build the stockade. There was no way to borrow. You couldn't walk into a bank and say you wanted $30,000 to take a trip back to the old Stone Age. You still could go to some industry or some university or the government, and if you could persuade them you had something on the ball, why, then they might put up the cash, after cutting themselves in on just about all of the profits. And naturally they'd run the show because it was their money, and all you had done was the sweating and the bleeding. "There's one thing that still bothers me," said Cooper, breaking the silence. "We spent a lot of time picking our spot so we'd miss the barn and house and all the other buildings." "Don't tell me! The windmill!" Hudson cried. "No, I'm pretty sure we're clear of that. But the way I figure, we're right astride that barbed wire fence at the south end of the orchard." "If you want, we could move the pyramid over 20 feet or so." Cooper groaned. "I'll take my chances with the fence." Adams got to his feet, the time unit tucked underneath his arm. "Come on, you guys. It's time to go." They climbed the pyramid gingerly and stood unsteadily at its top. Adams shifted the unit around, clasped it to his chest. "Stand around close," he said, "and bend your knees a little. It may be quite a drop." "Go ahead," said Cooper. "Press the button." Adams pressed the button. Nothing happened. The unit didn't work. Chapter 9. The chief of Central Intelligence was white-lipped when he finished talking. "You're sure of your information?" asked the president. "Mr. President," said the CIA chief, "I've never been more sure of anything in my entire life." The president looked at the other two who were in the room, a question in his eyes. The JCS chairman said, "It checks, sir, with everything we know." "But it's incredible," the president said. "They're afraid," said the CIA chief. "They lie awake nights. They've become convinced that we're on the verge of traveling in time. They've tried and failed, but they think we're near success. To their way of thinking, they've got to hit us now or never, because once we actually get time travel, they know their number's up." "But we dropped Project Mastodon entirely, almost 3 years ago. It's been all of 10 years since we stopped the research. It was 25 years ago that Hudson—" "That makes no difference, sir. They're convinced we dropped the project publicly, but went underground with it. That would be the kind of strategy they could understand." The president picked up a pencil and doodled on a pad. "Who was that old general?" he asked. "The one who raised so much fuss when we dropped the project. I remember I was in the Senate then. He came around to see me." "Bowers, sir," said the JCS chairman. "That's right. What became of him?" "Retired." "Well, I guess it doesn't make any difference now." He doodled some more and finally said, "Gentlemen, it looks like this is it. How much time did you say we had?" "Not more than 90 days, sir. Maybe as little as 30." The president looked up at the JCS chairman. "We're as ready," said the chairman, "as we will ever be. We can handle them, I think. There will, of course, be some—" "I know," said the president. "Could we bluff?" asked the Secretary of State, speaking quietly. "I know it wouldn't stick, but at least we might buy some time." "You mean hint that we have time travel?" The secretary nodded. "It wouldn't work," said the CIA chief tiredly. "If we really had it, there'd be no question then. They'd become exceedingly well-mannered, even neighborly, if they were sure we had it." "But we haven't got it," said the president gloomily. Chapter 10. The two hunters trudged homeward late in the afternoon with a deer slung from a pole they carried on their shoulders. Their breath hung visibly in the air as they walked along, for the frost had come, and any day now they knew there would be snow. "I'm worried about Wes," said Cooper, breathing heavily. "He's taking this too hard. We gotta keep an eye on him." "Let's take a rest," panted Hudson. They halted and lowered the deer to the ground. "He blames himself too much," said Cooper. He wiped his sweaty forehead. "There isn't any need to. All of us walked into this with our eyes wide open." "He's kidding himself and he knows it, but it gives him something to go on. As long as he can keep busy with all his puttering around, he'll be all right." "He isn't going to repair the time unit, Chuck." "I know he isn't, and he knows it too. He hasn't got the tools or materials. Back in the workshop he might have had a chance, but here he hasn't." "It's rough on him." "It's rough on all of us." "Yes, but we didn't get a brainstorm that marooned two old friends in this tail end of nowhere. And we can't make him swallow it when we say that it's okay. We don't mind at all." "That's a lot to swallow, Johnny." "What's going to happen to us, Chuck?" "We've got ourselves a place to live, and there's lots to eat. Save our ammo for the big game. A lot of eating for each bullet. And trap the smaller animals." "I'm wondering what will happen when the flour and all the other stuff is gone. We don't have too much of it because we always figured we could bring in more." "We'll live on meat," said Hudson. "We got bison by the million. The Plains Indians lived on them alone. And in the spring we'll find roots, and in the summer berries, and in the fall we'll harvest a half dozen kind of nuts." "Some day our ammo will be gone, no matter how careful we are with it." "Bows and arrows, slingshots, spears." "There's a lot of beasts here I wouldn't want to stand up to with nothing but a spear." "We won't stand up to them. We'll duck when we can, and run when we can't duck. Without our guns, we're no lords of creation, not in this place. If we're going to live, we'll have to recognize that fact." "And if one of us gets sick, or breaks a leg, or—" "We'll do the best we can. Nobody lives forever." But they were talking around the thing that really bothered them, Hudson told himself. Each of them afraid to speak the thought aloud. They'd live, all right, so far as food, shelter, and clothing were concerned, and they'd live most of the time in plenty, for this was a fat and open-handed land, and a man could make an easy living. But the big problem, the one they were afraid to talk about, was their emptiness of purpose. To live, they had to find some meaning in a world without society. A man cast away on a desert isle could always live for hope, but here there was no hope. A Robinson Crusoe was separated from his fellow humans by, at the most, a few thousand miles. Here they were separated by 150,000 years. Wes Adams was the lucky one so far. Even playing his 1,000-to-1 shot, he still held tightly to a purpose, feeble as it might be. The hope that he could repair the time machine. "We don't need to watch him now," thought Hudson. "The next time we'll have to watch is when he's forced to admit that he can't fix the machine." And both Hudson and Cooper had been kept sane enough, for there had been the cabin to be built, and the winter's supply of wood to cut, and the hunting to be done. But then there would come a time when all the chores were finished, and there was nothing left to do. "You ready to go?" asked Cooper. "Sure. All rested now," said Hudson. They hoisted the pole to their shoulders and started off again. Hudson had lain awake nights thinking of it, and all the thoughts had been dead ends.